Welcome to From Failures to Grow channel. We have another interview here on this channel, and it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Rodrigo Nardi, who is a psychiatrist from Brazil living in USA. And we met on Facebook group. He sent me a message, and as you can see now, we're having an online interview, and I believe it will be beneficial for everyone, especially for us and especially for Rod. So let's start. Rod,
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. And it was a quick interaction, and here we are. I like that.
great. You're welcome. And as I mentioned before, you are a psychiatrist and you like alternative ways of psychiatry, and we will talking about your new model of business, which would be in the psychiatry field. Could you share something about that with the audience?
Absolutely. So I've been before I went to medical school, I was a psychologist. So then I went to medical school, and after medical school, I became a psychiatrist, and I'm working in the United States since 2016 as a psychiatrist. And over the few years that I was working and lined up with my training in psychology, I started to notice a few inconsistencies in the field, and as a result of that, I created my own podcast, and I got, which allowed me to learn from the biggest or the best brains in the world in the field. So I ended up developing a paradigm of care in the field that contrasts significantly with what psychiatry is these days. And then I decided to make two business out of it. First, first was a mentorship program. I thought I could put all this information about psychiatry that is not financed by pharmaceutical companies, because you see there's something very interesting about it. We have hundreds of, maybe thousands of publications in the field of psychiatry. And at times you have a paper, a publication that is just, that spreads like wildfire. Right? And usually those publications are saying things like, oh, you can use this drug for that thing, you can combine these drugs, you can prescribe this new drug, there's also that drug for this problem. A result of that is in psychiatry, if you have noticed, is that every drug is good for everything somehow, even though we don't know what the drugs are doing. What happens is that those journals, those publications, they actually they make their living out of selling those articles. But some articles are just open access. They're not selling them. They're just for free disclosing them. And that has, you have to start asking yourself a question, whose interest is that those articles get spread for free? Right? Someone is paying for that. Someone is paying for that information to be disclosed everywhere. And obviously, usually who's financing that information to become public and to become widespread is whoever is selling the pill that is being announced as the greatest thing. So once you realize that, you start getting in touch with information in psychiatry that is quite different from the one that is very popular. So I decided to put everything together into a mentorship program to teach people about this other side of science that we're not getting in touch with, that in so many senses contradicts a lot of the things that we do in clinical practice. I've made a few couple $1,000s, maybe something like between $15,000 and $20,000. But I noticed that the yield was very low. The yield was low. Like I would present all that information, and at the end of it, people that actually paid to attend, I'll give you one example, okay? I'll give you one simple example. So there's a medication called Lamictal, right? Lamictal was approved for only one use, that is depression in bipolar disorder. It's the only thing that actually passed the test, that showed some benefit. However, of 5 randomized controlled trials, only 2 were positive and 3 were negative. 3 randomized controlled trials failed to show any benefit. 2 showed some benefit. Now, FDA only requires 2 that are positive regardless of how many are negative. So I'll present that information to the students. And at the end, despite the science and the evidence being against the use of the drug, they would say things like, oh, well, but I really like that drug. And so then that level of frustration for me, because I wasn't after the money, I was after making a difference, I decided to close the mentorship, or actually merge it with my private practice. And then I said, okay, teaching, even though people are willing to pay, is not making a dent. I wonder if I create a business where I can practice psychiatry in a very sound way that is actually science and evidence bound, at the same time that takes into account the nature and the sacredness of human experiences. That for modern psychiatry, every human experience is treated like a symptom. If you're sad, oh, we should treat that with a drug. It's not because your life is making you sad. Mm-hmm. I said, what if I hire people to work for me under that paradigm? And that's when this adventure started, because it's very difficult to find, I've been lucky, it's very difficult to find the right brains to relearn what we do. Very good. It's difficult to find professionals that are that actually care enough about listening to all that information and say, wow, so was I hurting my patients before? I want to do differently then, right? It's very hard to find it. And I knew that to do that, I'll have to come up with a model that will have a very small profit margin. And the most scary part of it, I knew I'll have to spread through the United States, because I wouldn't be able to find enough people in my state to make enough impact. So that's pretty much the challenge of what I'm doing, is that I have to go where the brains are, as opposed to make the convenience of working in the state where I live, in Rhode Island, because it's just very difficult to find the right kind of brains. And I have been lucky. I found some fantastic people that are joining my network, but the task is Herculean, is the difficult one.
All right. And may I ask you how many % of people from your field is with you? Let's say there are 100% of psychiatrists or people who are interested in this, and you want to convince them for your projects, for your businesses. How many % of these people are interested, of 100% of the, let's say, normal psychiatry?
Well, let me give you, I think I can answer that question telling you how my selection process worked. Okay. So the first time I made an announcement, I made an ad on LinkedIn for the selection. And so then I said, okay, I'm looking for critically minded psych NPs, right? Psych nurse practitioners. They're nurses that have had extra training so they can prescribe and do psychotherapy. So the first time I had about 40 applicants. I presented the expansion project in a glimpse of the paradigm of treatment that we use, that is this alternative way of seeing psychiatry and human behavior. And of those 40 people that I presented to, 7 joined my network and 4 survived the training. 4 continue to attend the training sessions, and they're being now credentialed in different states. I did the same thing just yesterday. I had 60 applicants. I had about maybe 20 people attend for the expansion, the session where I explained briefly what the paradigm is. And I think I got 8 people interested. of those 20s. So that gives you an idea of how bound we are to what we learn in TV, in our training, our books, that regardless of how much evidence. And it's a funny thing, when I started my podcast, I spoke to a guy, his name is Ron Bassman. He's a very intelligent guy, lives in Colorado. He wrote a book for The Right to Be. This guy was diagnosed with schizophrenia in the 60s and 70s, and he had 2 hospital stays that lasted 7 months each. ECT, like electroshock therapy, insulin convulsive therapy, drugged beyond belief. So he left the hospital for the second time, weaned off the medications, and became a PhD in psychology and wrote a book. Right, and so he lives his life. Yes, he made out. So he proves everything that we learn from our books wrong. For example, according to psychiatry, if you have psychosis for more than 6 months, we're going to call that schizophrenia, and you're supposed to have psychosis for the rest of your life. And he's not the only one that I spoke in my podcast. I have other quite impressive examples. But this guy is so fantastic because he said, "Rod, do you think you're going to just present scientific data and people will change their minds? They'll not." But I was naive. I was starting my podcast saying, of course people want to learn, So it's a bit of that gives an idea of the because I'm not alone in this movement, right? Of pointing the excesses of the field, or I may be the first or one of the first that actually decided to make a business out of telling the truth, and a clinical business, I should say. But there's a lot of folks already waking up for this, and still we are a small fraction of all the professionals in the field.
The truth is very slow usually.
Mm-hmm.
True. It's very interesting that some people who are diagnosed with this kind of mental issue are able to write books which have certain impacts. So I think it's very great success, in my opinion, because myself, I had some mental issue as well many years ago. So I was on pills for a while. I think it was roughly 1 year. And after I started to read, psychology and also psychiatry, and I joined a network marketing company, so another source of information. Plus working on my health, sport and many things. And I believe I'm okay at the moment.
I hope you're doing better.
100%, yes. 100%.
I'm glad.
100%. It's about the rest, less stress and everything. So like that.
Yes. And I think that's one of the things that one of my pet peeves with modern psychiatry. People refer to it as biological psychiatry. I don't like that expression, but and I can explain why. But let's go with that for now. Is that biological psychiatry or modern psychiatry seems to claim that can make you feel good, even if you don't make the things that make you feel good. So let's say you're living a life, I'll explain. So you're living a life that is unlivable.
Okay.
Or you're living a life full of emotional deprivations, which is the core of our paradigm, right? The paradigm of the True Psychiatry Network. And let's say you're living this life and it's just not doable. Let's say you're lonely, overworked, and you just don't have time for fun. And yet, somehow, you want to feel good. So you go to a psychiatrist, and he doesn't point out that your life is unlivable. It's just a miserable life. He says, oh yeah, if you're feeling down, something's wrong. Here's a pill. Let's hope this pill will make this difference, right? When you look to the efficacy of the pills, it's very low, but the side effects are pretty real.
Yes, some of them are very addictive. So this is another thing which can keep the patients being using them. Yeah? And could you disclose something about the mentorship? I mean, what the model which you would like to push between the people would like looks like. Sorry.
Well, yeah. So, and you mentioned when we were exchanging some messages, you said, "Oh, I'd like to talk about the human soul, right? What is this experience that we call being a person?" So I can talk about our model, and you know, there's really very little that is new about this model. It actually is an amalgamation of Freudian insights, of Jungian insights, of behaviorism, Maslow's work, and I think the best modern author that summarized those things was Martin Seligman, the creator of positive psychology. So here's the thought, how I can present this thing. I don't need to know anything about you to know that you need air and you need nourishment or food and that you need temperature regulation of your body. And overall, you're biologically designed to maintain the integrity of your body, right? I don't need to have a medical degree to do that, and I definitely don't need to interview you for any given time to ask questions and do like what we call like a history and physical, as we call in medicine, an H&P. I don't need that. I know every human being will meet that criteria, right? It turns out that our emotions, our emotional life is not, it doesn't happen the way it happened just by chance. That the things we feel have a specific purpose, not only identifiable causes, but the things you feel have a specific purpose. Let's take emotions, for example. Emotions have two components. One of them is sensorial. The other one is motivational. So in one sense, your emotions talk to you just like your senses talk to you about reality. So if you are frustrated, it tells you something about your reality. If you are angry, it tells you something about your reality. Fair? Besides that, emotions have a motivational component, which is more in the sense of what's the purpose of each emotion. So, for example, if you're angry, what's the purpose of anger? Is to hurt. Once you hurt something or someone, then you're relieved. You know, you can be at work and your boss tells you something nasty and you say, I don't care about this thing. Who cares about this guy, what he thinks? But deep down you're upset. And this lying to yourself is what we call suppression, right? You're suppressing the negative emotion. Now, you see, 100 years ago, this guy called Freud said, you don't really suppress the emotion, you just suppress the cognition of it. You're just not aware of it anymore. It's still sitting there and sapping your actions. So you leave work thinking, I'm not mad about that bad review. But as you drive home, you cut people, you curse, you get home, maybe you kick your cat, you have a fight with your wife, and you complain of the food. And then we call that displacement. Why? Because your anger wants a specific set of things. Your anger wants to hurt. And then you hurt. And then your wife is crying, and now you feel you come to yourself and you apologize, which, of course, I hope nobody will do that. Then we have frustration. Frustration, for example, wants you to quit, right? So while modern psychiatry will take all those emotions and just try to change your machinery with a drug, our paradigm will do what psychology always did, that is to look at you and say, okay, why are you feeling this way, and how can we fix your reality so you don't feel the way you don't want to feel anymore, right? And with that in mind, what becomes clear, taking into account all the work of these authors that I've mentioned, is that we also have not only physiological needs that are very basic, we also have very basic emotional needs that are associated with well-being. So, for example, I don't need to know you to know that you have some degree of a need for human interactions.
So this would be the part of the muscle pyramid, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, this will be my paradigm of care, where people come to me and the diagnosis, instead of saying, well, you're sad, so we're going to call that depression, or you're anxious, we're going to call that generalized anxiety disorder, our diagnosis is actually based on your quality of life and if your basic emotional needs are actually fulfilled. These basic emotional needs are a direct reflection of our biology. We are designed to behave like that and to feel like that on account of our survival. Now, maybe not so much, because now we live in a society and we're fairly protected. You can be terribly alone and you're not going to die. While a primate that is alone in nature is dead meat. So because of our similarity with those animals, and with pretty much every mammal, with a few exceptions, isolation means death. So we should have wired that isolation will make us feel bad. So people come to me and they have a terrible, lonely life and they want to feel good. I don't feel comfortable giving them a pill to feel good with a terrible, lonely life. I rather talk to them and figure ways that they can actually make friends.
So you are trying to help them by your, let's say, kind words, or showing them the way that can help them to heal while, for example, performing, I don't know, let's say exercise or taking their house or whatever, maybe reading, working on their cognitive functions, let's like memory or focus and these things.
Yes, well, I think that the artistic part of the job is how to inspire people to operate changes in their own lives.
All right.
Because that's what is needed. I don't want you to feel good if your life sucks. Mm-hmm. It doesn't help you, right? I don't want to give you a pill to make you feel good if your life is bad. I want you to say, hey, why are you feeling bad and what needs to be changed? So which is not a new idea, but for some reason in the 70s, when psychiatry divorced itself from psychology, that was abandoned. And now people come to me feeling sad. Oh, well, you're sad. You should take an antidepressant, in hopes that you're going to feel good despite your reality being terrible. So the artistic part and the challenging part of the psychotherapy is, how can I help? How can I inspire this person to engage in movement, to make changes to their reality in order to feel the way they want to feel, as opposed to say, well, keep everything as you have been doing, and here's this drug, and and when the drug doesn't work, I'm going to put something on top of it. And when you can't, again, sleep, because one of the things that solitude causes is insomnia. I'll give you a drug to sleep, as opposed to say, hey man, what can we do to get you to meet people? Because that is a real solution for the real problem, as opposed to anesthetize your suffering.
Once I was reading about I think it's amino acid, if I'm not mistaken.
What is it?
Amino acid.
Okay.
It's called tryptophan, and it's supposed to help us during the nights to protect our organs and everything. So I believe these things could help us to even protect or develop our mental health.
Yes, I would say that from a behavioral perspective, we need sleep, we need proper nourishment, we need those very basic things. But when you talk about tryptophan, usually tryptophan is researched as a precursor of serotonin. And surprisingly, modern psychiatry is based on a hypothesis that was never proven. So this idea, and this is mind-boggling, but the idea that there's a biochemical imbalance in your brain if you're feeling sad, it's a theoretical idea. The idea that if you're hearing voices is because there's a biochemical imbalance in your brain, that's also a theoretical idea, but we never found that. We never found the low serotonin in depression. There's a lot of publications claiming so, but once they were reviewed, became clear that it was never proved. And the same for schizophrenia. There's no excess of dopamine in the brain for schizophrenics compared to general population, except, well, after they are exposed to treatment, then the treatment messes up with the chemicals in their brain, but not before. And ADHD is not a lack of dopamine in the brain, even though Adderall, Ritalin, they have the same mechanism of action of cocaine. And what that does is it forces the release of dopamine. But if you can't focus, it has nothing to do with little dopamine. You know, so drugs have specific effects. There's an author, a British author called Joanna Moncrief, and she published a paper, a review about the serotonin, saying, "Hey, not there, right?" Very good publication. But above all, she came up with a model where she says that modern psychiatry is based on a disease model, but the disease doesn't exist. We haven't found it yet. So she suggests a drug-centered model, thinking instead of saying, well, if you feel better when you drink alcohol, it's because there's a deficiency of alcohol in your blood. So if you feel better when you take an antidepressant, it's because there's the deficiency of serotonin. Well, ecstasy also does increase your serotonin. So instead of that, she said, well, drugs have specific effects. And at times those effects may be desirable. And that's how we should use it, as opposed to say, well, you're sad, you should take a pill for a full year. Here, take this pill for a full year, and don't worry about fixing your life. Keep doing what you're doing, right? So which I think reflects in the low yield of the field, right? We have a very low remission rate for pretty much everything that we put our hands on.
It sounds to me like when somebody takes the pills and doing still the same, living still the same life, that
yes.
The pill is here actually to stop the growth in the life, or to stop the discovery and other opportunities or another ways of living, for example. This is how I find it from your words.
Yeah, we do. Well, think about it. We can make an analogy between emotions and pain, for example. If you take, if you have imagine every time you're sitting, you have to keep moving, right? So what happens is your body weight is being compressed in your buttocks, and there's no blood circulation in those points. So you have to move every so often so the blood reaches. So that's the reason you feel pain if you're sitting in the same position for too long. It's to force you to move, right? We know, for example, people that have diabetes, they don't feel their feet anymore on account of the neuropathy that is a result of the diabetes. And as a result of that, they get hurt, they have amputated toes, or they lose their feet because you don't notice when something is bothering you, right? Well, and then you think about it and you say, well, if that is true, chronic opioid users should have more joint problems because they don't have that feedback from their joints, and they're probably using their joints a bit poorly, because in reality, we don't notice this thing because it happens before we can think about it. But every step you give is different from the previous one. Because we have a system basically of feedback that says, okay, don't step always on the same spot because you're going to get hurt. And if that's true, then if you take opioids, you should have more joint problems. And guess what? You do. If you're an opioid addict, you have more arthritis, you have more joint problems. So it's proven. So the function of pain seems to be to force you to engage in movement of some sort. If I suppress your pain, you're not going to engage in that movement. At times may be desirable. Maybe you bought a new pair of shoes. It took a month to arrive on the mail, and it's a little bit too tight. It's going to hurt, but you're going for that party. You're going to be drunk anyways. You're not going to feel it. So for that night to decide to go for the alcohol, suppress the pain, and use the nice shoes, right? At times you are going through a moment in your life where you cannot implement any meaningful changes. And you're bound to be where you are, and maybe you need drugs to plow through it. Power to you. But if you are miserable in a situation and I suppress your misery, likelihood is the main motivator you have to implement a change in your life, to find a friend, to find a purpose, to pursue something, to have fun. The main motivator you have is now suppressed because drugs, most of psychiatric drugs have an impact of reducing the amplitude of your emotions. You know, it's a common thing in clinical practice that people will say, and I'm not saying stop your meds. This is a very serious decision. But it's a very common thing in clinical practice that patients that respond to treatment, they say, I'm feeling better. They also say, I'm feeling blah, because the amplitude of the emotional experience is reduced. And then I ask myself, can I have a psychiatry that doesn't focus in reducing the human experience, but instead focuses on celebrating the human experience and, you know, having people shine and actually change their lives, look for the new job, you know, engage in a hobby or have a meaningful life or live life to its fullness, right? As opposed to say, well, no, you know, stay where you are and keep doing what you're doing and let's suppress your insatisfaction with pills. And that's how the True Psychiatry Network was born.
So the hobbies and building new friendships, let's say, or relations, and developing us, I mean, inside and outside, is like starting the motor of the machine, which pulls us through the life. Yeah. I have another question. There are many topics about autism and
autism.
Autism. We had a talk at our workplace a couple of months ago. I didn't know about it, and there was mentioned something like, let's say the kids or the autistic people are not able to learn some stuff in certain time, and I'm not a professional, you know, from medical field or something like that. My daily job is a technician, but I do this. Yeah. But whatever. I have some interest, as I mentioned, books and these things. And do you think it could be problematic, for example, creating synapses in the brain? Could it be cause of autism? Like they have no ability to learn, for example, new things?
We don't know. So one thing about psychiatric diagnoses is that they're not real diagnoses. The difference between a real diagnosis and a psychiatric diagnosis, or a real diagnosis and what we call syndromic diagnosis, and I'm going to try not to get too nerdy here, but is that when you know what's wrong in the body, we call that a disease, and we call that a real diagnosis. When we know at least something of the underlying biological underpinnings of a presentation, any presentation. In psychiatry, we don't know them, except for dementias. We haven't found precisely what's wrong in the brain. We have found changes in the brain, but those changes are most of the time functional. They don't reflect a structural problem, a defect in the brain. Instead, changes that the brain is designed to actually do. So we don't know what causes those presentations. We know for sure there was an expansion of those diagnoses, and it may be like nobody had autism in 1980s, or Asperger's. Nobody had it. Like it was a very rare, low prevalence thing. But coincidentally, once a given medication was approved for behavioral issues of autism, this diagnosis saw a huge expansion. Now, what do you do with the diagnosis? What does it change somebody's life, you know? Some people that present the syndrome of autism, they are intellectually very fine. They're fine. They have jobs. They can have a full life. They can do whatever they want. And at times, it can have some cognitive impairment associated with it, but it's not a rule. So it's hard to say it is because of the autism. It is because of that, because it's not a rule. Some people do just fine. Some people have some limitations. And So I guess a much more relevant question for the diagnosis itself is, what can be done so you live a full life? As opposed to say, well, you have this, and if you lose your mind, you should take this pill or something like that, because that's, we had drugs approved for the behavioral problems of autism that coincide with a time in our society where parents became apparently handicapped in raising children and using proper discipline. That's a long discussion. I even interviewed someone who's a specialist in the matter, how around the 80s, this idea that, and I'm not saying, I'm not in favor or against, I'm just explaining the complexity of the matter. In the 80s, this idea that you should never use physical punishment with your children, right? And don't say no, by the way. Don't ever say no to your children, where that came from. But what happens is that along with that, we became a society that believes that an antipsychotic medication is more humane than a flip-flop. You see, spanking a child, in terms of side effects, may not be good. I'm not saying spank your children. I'm not saying that. But if you spank your child as a disciplinary action, the side effects of that are way less than the side effects of giving Risperdal to a child. You see, spanking doesn't cause cognitive side effects, doesn't cause high cholesterol, doesn't cause diabetes, doesn't cause obesity, right? Doesn't cause heart attacks or strokes, while Risperdal, Abilify, olanzapine causes all those things, including Parkinson's disease. But we became a society that believes that those drugs are more humane than spanking. So conveniently, we fell there. There was some, if you are a conspiracy theorist, you may see a intentionality in it. I don't know, but for me, it just puzzles me that something that has been used in human beings for thousands of years all of a sudden became demonized, and it was replaced with chemicals that shorten your lifespan.
That is another thing. I would say, like, we are talking about the parents' behaviors, let's say. And I feel like some people or some parents, they show their love by doing everything for the kids, like feeding them by 100 kilos of chocolates, and these things. And I think it's actually not love but punishment, because the kids are after, there is the obesity and problems with their even mental health, because a lot of caffeine, is in chocolate and these things. So maybe the thing which we think is love is actually hate, let's say. But we don't see it, because we don't want to see it. Maybe it's something from our past when we were kids and we didn't have enough of these things, so we want to provide them to our kids, and in the final we are destroying their health.
Yes,
this
yes,
is how I see it.
And I think there's multiple factors. I like what you're saying a lot. Another thing that I always think about is, if we go back to the 60s, for example, you could have one full-time job in a family and provide for everyone, right? So if you have like a middle class, I saw the other day the calculations of what middle class money in the 60s would be equivalent in today's money. And so to have the same buying power of a middle class in the 60s, a family will have to make $276,000 a year, which according to the government is considered very rich, because that's the only people they can tax. They cannot tax anyone above that, because those guys are paying their campaigns, right? So with a $276,000 buying power for a family, that allows kids to have time with their parents, or at least with one of their parents, and allows them to actually be parented You have a parent that has the time, the energy, the availability to be patient or to be tough when is needed. Now you have couples that work 40 hours a week plus. They have no energy for their children. They have no time because despite working all of that, they don't have the same buying power that middle class had in the 60s. They're barely killing 100,000 as a couple to keep a family, and much less in many more families. And when that kid is crying, dude, I just don't have what it takes. I'll give him some chocolate. Give him the video game. Give him the damn tablet. Because those parents are being worked to the ground by their own government that keeps, folks don't realize, but America's tax burden is 50%. People think, no, the paycheck is 27%. They say everything you buy has taxes built in, brother. And the guy that is selling you something also is paying taxes. So 50% of the money is going back to the United States government. I came from Brazil where the total tax burden is 70%. But you don't see it because they only take that little 30% chunk of your paycheck. So families are being run to the ground. We pay more taxes than people paid in the Middle Ages. And when your kid is yelling and you have worked 8 hours in a freaking killing job, here's your Hershey bar, brother. There's only so much people can do. So, and then, of course, medicine takes upon itself to fill that gap with medications. And that is a claim that we should not have made at all.
It's like a spiral. Yeah.
Definitely.
All right. We were talking about the soul. There is a theory that our souls or brains are connected to the universe. And maybe you heard about the universal substance when we think about some stuff and like visualizing that universe can create it for us. And in my family, we have a saying which says something like, your faith will heal you in the time. So what do you think about this, let's say, power of the thoughts? Or when I believe that I'm healthy and I will be healthy, then the reality will become that I am healthy. Mentally, probably when somebody would ampute my hand or arm, it would stay like that. Yeah? So this is another thing. But in general, what do you think about this philosophy, let's say?
Yes, I really like philosophical questions because they pretty much guide my clinical work all the time. I think the challenge we find is there is a reality. There is a real world in which we live. I don't know if it's a simulation, what it is, as people are talking these days, but there is a real world, and we are just a piece of this real world. We have a biological body that has needs that need to be attended to, and there is, in other words, I believe in the truth. There's something that can be called the truth. One thing that happened in the field is that because of relativism and social constructivism, the idea that each person has their own reality, right? Now, the view that if each one has its own reality, from a therapeutic perspective, should lead to ineffective interventions, because if I give you a glass of Coca-Cola, but I put poison in it, you may think you're drinking Coca-Cola, but you're drinking poison. You're still going to die, no matter what you think about it. So what happens is we have to embrace the reality of our needs. And that, once you do that, what I notice is that allows you to actually start expanding your life. So if you're struggling to survive with the very basics, if you're struggling with solitude, if you're struggling with lack of purpose, if you're struggling with lack of sense of meaning in your life, or one thing that we see in America very frequently, you don't have enough new things in your life. In other words, there's no movement. Because you see, we were sold this idea that this is the American dream. If you have the car, the wife, and the job, and the house, you're going to be fine. So people have accomplished those things, and they think they can sit on it for 40 years and retire and live a happy life. Well, you cannot. You cannot, because we are designed for movement. Yes, we are designed for change, for new things. Once you have attended those basic needs, it becomes easier for you to say, wait, what else is out there? Who else can I be in this existence? How can I vibrate to be the person that I want to be? How can I transform my reality towards something that goes above just attending my basic emotional needs? But when your emotional needs are not attended to, it's the same as if you were starving and trying to do something magnificent. Some people can do. There was a Buddha, you know. Some people can do magnificent things in this, but most of us are regular folks. If we're not in proper temperature and fed, we cannot think about more elevated things. And if our emotional, very basic emotional needs are not met, needs for relationships, for sense of purpose, for accomplishments, for new things, then you're too far away. You're going to have too many chips on your shoulders to actually proceed in your life in a more effective way. So, and then once you have attended to the basics of your emotional biology, so to speak, we could call that, or you have attended to the basics of what a human being deserves to have, and most of it has to be conquered, you know, earned. It's not just given to you. If anything, if you're going to rely on the government, it's going to take most of it from you. But once you have set for yourself an existence that is minimally satisfying, now you can actually regroup and think, you know, who can I be? What's the next big thing for myself? You know, how can I make the most from this ride on earth? And be that person, and then you manifest those things, and then you become that guy that will obtain those results. But it's very difficult for most of us to go in that direction if you're facing meaningful deprivations. And that is what we do in our clinical work. We try to say, okay, man, you got to respect yourself. You have to attend yourself. And we do that by figuring what are your strengths, you know, because most of us are wasting our talents. And the idea is to be brave and bold enough to take what you are made of, man, and go for it. Because, you know, one day you're going to be 85 and you're going to put your head in a pillow and look back what you're going to see, right? So that is very relevant. And modern psychiatry ignores that. They are okay with you living in a cloud of sedation and partial experiences, while we are designed biologically for intensity, for beautiful and strong things.
It is healthy to grow up, to discover.
Yeah.
Not everybody probably has this talent. I mean, not everybody is that excited about new things, but it is amazing when we see something new every day, one little thing, and at least in my case. And it was a very nice interview, actually. I have a last question, which is not part of psychiatry or part of health, more from financial world, because this channel is about investing in different kinds of assets. And but it is an alternative to the classical monetary system. What do you think about cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin?
So I have a brother who's big on the financial world, and he keeps telling me things like, for example, buy gold and things like that, right? And you see, it seems to require, just like I'm learning that to start my business, right? To start my network and to expand it, I'm fighting all these variables because the world is rigged, and is rigged to favor huge enterprises. if you try to do something small or alternative, you're going to find rules and laws that prevent you of doing so, because the blueprint to be followed to do business, as a natural consequences of regulations, as the government puts them in place, will always favor big enterprises. And so it takes a lot of effort and coordination and patience to kind of navigate it. Now, when it comes to cryptocurrency, I think for me, I always felt I was in over my head when talking about it. I always felt like I struggle to understand, because at one hand, what is this thing? And there's no government backing this up. But when you think about the dollar, the government that should be backing the dollar keeps printing money. So the money keeps losing value.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I struggle a lot, because I feel like I am between, a challenging thing for me to understand and grasp, and on the other hand, a failed model where the government keeps sabotaging all the money that I make. They take half of it, and then they also keep printing, so whatever I'm keeping to myself is worth less and less and less. So but I struggle. I don't seem to have the mindset for that kind of investment, for that kind of enterprise. But that's the size of it. Eventually I may navigate there. If I have proper, if I feel I have proper guiding, like really close, someone really patient to say, hey, that has a fiduciary duty with my profit, with my success, as opposed to just like banks do, right? They pretend to help you just to take your money away. But I may go in that direction, but I haven't had yet I don't have the psychological making to be a pioneer in that matter, or to jump on that bandwagon by myself.
All right. That is the vision behind this.
Maybe you're going to be the guy.
I believe I know something about that. Most probably not
so that's what I'm saying.
Technically, like the code and these things. No idea, but the use and the vision, I really like it. Of course, there are many rumors about it and stuff like that, but you know how it is. Once you dig for some information about anything, you find many different information compared to, for example, the mainstream. So yeah, that's. I'm really glad that you came to visit my channel.
Well, it was a pleasure. I appreciate you accepting my proposition, because I needed to talk, and I was hoping it was going to be interesting for you as well.
The pleasure is mine.